Welcome, and my name is Art Cueto, and I have the distinct privilege of being the moderator for the panel on the 1984 Olympic Games. And just as a point of reference, I was a 20-year-old junior. I was a 20-year-old junior at USC during the summer of 1984. For some weird reason, my application to be a volunteer at the 84 Games, got lost somewhere, so I never got to actually be part of LAOC, but I was a student worker in the village, so I had a credential and I had access to the village, and was able to raid the French Olympic team's office on the night of the closing ceremonies, and me and a gang of other workers helped ourselves to several bottles of French champagne that night. And and just in case you're questioning my fashion sensibilities, you're in good company, something my wife does every day almost. But this tie, actually, I wore it because it is an official Olympic tie from the 84 Games. So it's part of Olympic memorabilia, and I'm very excited to be able to wear it today. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip the introductions, but I'll just do them very briefly of our the members of our panel, just for the sake of time. With us we have Oscar Delgado, who is Vice President of the LA84 Foundation, who is going to be speaking to us today about the 84 Games' long-term legacy. We're very excited and pleased to have Oscar with us. He is a fellow Angelino, and not just that, he's a fellow Northeast Angelino. I grew up in Highland Park, Oscar in Eagle Rock, so I'm thrilled that he's part of here. And equally as excited to have David Simon, who was the Vice President of LAOC from the time of the organization's inception, 1979, is that correct? Through the games themselves, through 1984. Since then, David went on to, he is currently the senior advisor of the Los Angeles Sports Council, and he has a rich and storied career with Olympic sports, international sporting competitions, and we're very excited to have David here. And he is going to speak about the planning of the 84 Games and what made them unique in terms of Olympics prior and since. But to set the stage, I thought it was important to kind of talk a little bit about Los Angeles itself and really the role that sports has played in LA's development. And I'm going to go really fast through this. It's got a lot of information. I totally geeked out when I was putting this together. But it just, I think it sets a good framework. LA's got a lot of stadiums and a lot of arenas. I did some research on the internet, and looking at stadiums of at least 10,000 seats, LA's got 14 of them. Combination of professional, college, junior college, stadiums of different varieties. And then it's got 13 arenas, also a very significant number. Combined, I believe, and I haven't fact-checked it, I haven't gone through the data yet, but I believe that it's the largest concentration of stadia within any city in the United States. And this list is not complete. It does not include venues like Santa Anita Racetrack. But for the sake of this discussion, it is what it is. So if we map them out, here's what it looks like. The white dots are the venues themselves. They range from, here we go. So there's UCLA up here with Drake Stadium, Poly Pavilion, all the way to Brent Event Center in Irvine, Rose Bowl, all the way Long Beach Arena. And you can see how they're clustered along the Figueroa Corridor, Dodger Stadium, Staples Center, or what it's called now. And then this cluster over here. This cluster over here, Galen Center, Coliseum, BMO Stadium. The Inglewood cluster, SoFi, the Forum, and the new Intuit Dome that's going to open next year, or 2014, yeah, so next year, Dignity Health. So you see, we've got a lot of venues. Orange County, Angel Stadium, Honda Center, Anaheim Convention Center, Fullerton. So a lot of these stadiums, so we got a lot. So what does it mean? Okay, so anyway, that's a 5-mile radius, and that's a 10-mile radius. You can see it's dense. So I didn't have enough time to really go through and evaluate it. But this is just kind of like gives the number of stadiums, how many pro stadiums we have, total of 8. That would be a combination of 5 stadiums, 8 arenas. Then there's university. Community college is very significant, and I'll explain why in a bit. And then the others are kind of like, there's the 2 arenas tied to convention centers, Long Beach and Anaheim. And then the Forum, which used to be an arena, now it's a concert venue, but it will be used in the '84 games as, I believe, the gymnastics venue. So this is a timeline of the development of the arenas. Again, the oldest venue we have is the Rose Bowl, which opened in 1922, so it's 101 years old, followed shortly thereafter by the Coliseum. It goes all the way through time. So you can see there's the significance of this level of construction during the 1920s and 30s. Oh, and I should also say these gray lines represent the years of the Olympic Games. So the orange are venues that still exist. The pink are venues that have been demolished, no longer exist. And the blues are venues that have been converted to other uses. So that's the Olympic Auditorium, which is now a church. And I talked about the Forum down here. And here's the ages of those. So because of that, I think that you could divide the development of the sports infrastructure in LA into 5 different categories, starting with the late 19th century all the way down to where we are today. And I'll go over those a little bit more detail. Now, in terms of the late 18th century, there was a great paper that was written by Marty Wax back in 1984, I believe, that was in the APA Journal, where he talked about what made LA unique. One of the things he talked about was, well, even before that, the railroads, Transcontinental Line, Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, are the 2 principal catalysts that helped our population, or the population of the city, grow from 11,000 to more than 50,000. And then it attracted relatively wealthy people from across the country to relocate in Southern California. The railroads were the largest landowners. They needed to profit from their investment, so they promoted the area quite extensively. And because of that relative influence, they were able to popularize recreational activities in a greater concentration than in most other cities. Corona, of course, had Grand Boulevard. They had the auto races in the early 1900s, where there was about 300,000 people showing up on any given day, all by rail. Bicycling was hugely popular. I believe the statistics were something close to 20 to 30% mode split by the early 1900s. And then the promotions started big time. The Fiesta Association, Pasadena, with the Rose Parade, of course, and of course the Fiesta Association, or the Valley Hunt Club, I'm sorry. The Valley Hunt Club in Pasadena, the Fiesta Association in Los Angeles. And then the significant infrastructure improvement. Okay, so now we're going to the 19-teens to the 1920s. The important thing here is that there was a lot of investment in infrastructure. So we've got Henry Huntington's Pacific Electric rail line, which decentralized development. The Aqueduct and the Port of Los Angeles both opened. But then there were these investments in city making. The Shrine Auditorium, I believe, was like 1925. The Hollywood Bowl was 1922. Again, they're huge. Now, this next slide, this is interesting. Coliseum and Rose Bowl were both opened within a year of each other. But the interesting thing about this is that during the same period of time, we had other stadiums like Yankee Stadium, Soldier Field in Chicago, Philadelphia, their municipal stadium, or JFK, Tiger Stadium. All these stadiums were built in what was then the 10th largest cities. So you can see their populations were here. They were building stadiums and 102,000 and so on. LA at the time was the 10th largest city, and it had a population of just over 500,000, and it opened a stadium of 75,000. Wow. In 1923. You had Pasadena at the time had a population of 45,000. It opened a stadium of 57,000. Everyone in Pasadena, all of Pasadena's residents could fit inside the day it opened. And then you can see how by 1930, you can see how things changed. LA jumped to 5th largest city. They went from 10th to 5th in that time, and you can see how that all shakes out. So the hubris of the boosters of the time to say we're going to build this level of development in such a relatively small place, especially considered with the rest of the country, was quite significant. So the mid-20th century, go to the next phase, suburbanization, urban renewal, the Federal Highway Act, all influenced development at the time. Albeit it's not a very good picture, but it's a rendering of the East Los Angeles Community College campus. What's interesting about this is that I believe 6 of the community colleges within Los Angeles County either were opened post-World War II or they moved to new campuses after World War II, all because of the GI Bill and free tuition, and same thing with Cal State universities. So you had all of a sudden this massive investment in educational programs due to the GI Bill, which resulted in, this is Weingart Stadium, about 26,000 seats in Monterey Park, which was also used in the 84 games. And then, of course, you had the arrival of professional sports at the time, where the Rams were LA's first professional team. They relocated from Cleveland in 1946. Dodgers followed in 1958, Minneapolis, and then there was this group of expansion teams, the Chargers, the original Los Angeles Chargers. They then moved to San Diego, and now they're back in LA. The Angels in 61 and the Kings in 67. So you have this new crop. Oh, and that, of course, is the Coliseum that was used by the Dodgers for the first several years while Dodger Stadium was being built. The interesting thing about this is if you read the literature, you know that there is a lot of documentation about urban renewal, the use of Los Angeles' use of urban renewal as a means of assembling the property for Dodger Stadium. And all the controversies that came out. If you're a total policy sports geek like I am, the Dodgers Move West is one of the best books you could possibly read. But one of the interesting things about these venues that were built during this time is that you see them as standalone, surrounded by parking, very auto-oriented. And now as we move into the 80s and 90s, 1980s, I was 20, that was my wild time. It was the height of LA sports. We had multiple World Series championships, NBA championships, the Raiders won a Super Bowl, and of course we had the 84 Olympic Games, which were all brought about because we had so many existing venues. And therefore, I know Oscar's going to talk very eloquently about it, the profits that were able to be generated because of the limited capital outlay that was required. As we go to the 80s and 90s, or as we transition from the 80s to the 90s, everything changed. Maturation of the infrastructure, the economics of sports changed, and as a result, Anaheim Stadium and the Coliseum were no longer viable venues for professional football. And whereas 30 years prior, teams were arriving to LA, now they were departing LA. And then as Red Cole talked earlier about the social unrest and stuff, it was a very difficult time in Los Angeles. Now we move into the 21st century, and I think that there's been a significant change, a shift from suburban development model to an urban development model, where now these venues are not just developed as standalone projects, but as part of a larger district. and how they are integrated into the community plays a significant role, that being BMO Stadium, and of course, the Cathedral of Sports or Castle of Sport, whatever you want to call it, SoFi Stadium. It is what it is. But finally, we were able to Rams returned, the Chargers relocated because of the investment in sports venues. And I think that has to do with, if you're familiar with the experience economy, with how the shift from sports has evolved from being a event-driven thing to now it's an experience thing. You no longer have to be inside of a venue to watch a game. You can sit at home, maybe do it more comfortably than actually attending a game. And so it's all changed. And just as an example of that, and also what role community is, or how sports generates community, I'm going to offer up this little video right here. Let's see. Let me start. So this is from LAFC, from BMO Stadium, or back then it was Bank of California Stadium. If you're not familiar with it. All right, so that concludes my presentation. And yeah, but it just goes to show that sports is that video is not from South America, it's not from Mexico, it's not from Europe, it's from Exposition Park, BMO, and it's community. It's sports as community, a place of common experience, a place of camaraderie, and those people are as influential in the outcome of the game as the players are, I would suggest. So thanks for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to David Simon, who is going to give us a chat about the planning of the 84 games. Thank you, David.
Okay. Thank you, Art. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all. I'll just start with a comment about 1932, which may or may not be obvious, but that is that if it weren't for the 32 games, I don't think either the 84 or 2028 games would have been held in Los Angeles. And I say that because the people who led these successful bids were motivated in large part by memories of the previous games. In the case of 1932, it was Mayor Tom Bradley and then John Argue, who led the organizing committee. Tom Bradley talked often and openly about the fact that in 1932 he was a 10 or 12-year-old kid. He sneaked into the Coliseum to see track and field. He admitted that after the statute of limitations had run out. And in the case of John Argue, John himself was born in 1932. His father had been an Olympian in the Paris Olympics of 1924. And I think that gave them a certain passion for wanting to see the games come back. And in the case of 2028, their counterparts, Mayor Garcetti and then Mayor Garcetti and Casey Wasserman as chair of the bid committee, now chair of the organizing committee, they too, as 10, 11, 12-year-old kids in 1984 had been to the games, and that's where their passion came from. So I think that's something that very few cities have, is bids that are led by people who remember the previous games. Paris is going to have the games next year. Unfortunately, there's no one around from 1924 to carry the torch. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think is a conventional narrative about the 1984 games that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. And I think that narrative runs something like this. The 1976 Olympics were held in Montreal, and they were notable as a debacle financially. And the bid for the '84 games began the next year. And because of that, Los Angeles was the only city interested in hosting the games, therefore was in a strong position to be able to negotiate certain terms with the IOC that you can't do when you have other cities bidding against you. And then that led to eventually the hiring of Peter Ueberroth to be the CEO of the games, and he and Harry Usher and the leadership team they put together were just the right people in the right place at the right time, and were able to produce the most successful and organizationally successful, financially and organizationally successful games in history to that point. Well, that may be the narrative that you believe. We're now, I know, 39 years past the games. Looking around the room, I don't see anybody over 40 here. So I'm going to assume for a moment that none of you were here for the games in '84 or for the bid. So I'll just comment on this traditional narrative that I just told you about. First of all, it was not true that Los Angeles was the only city. The background was this. Los Angeles actually bid against Montreal for the '76 games and lost. They came in third. In 1980, Los Angeles bid again against Moscow and lost for the 1980 games, came in second. So with that background, even before the '76 Olympics were in Montreal, the feeling internationally was, well, LA just came in third, they came in second. I mean, it's their turn. What's the point in submitting a losing bid against them? There was kind of this attitude internationally. But that overlooked the fact that the United States Olympic Committee still had to pick officially a city to be the candidate in 1984. And that process began in 1977, less than a year after the 1976 games in Montreal, which had racked up a deficit of $1 billion in 1976 dollars. Montreal didn't pay off that debt until 2006. So with that debt looming, that was another reason for cities to say they didn't want to bid. But the U.S. Olympic Committee decided, well, we're not going to give Los Angeles a free ride. They're going to have to bid. If anybody else in the United States wants it, we're going to have a bid process and we'll find out. I won't take you through all the details, but it came down to Los Angeles against New York in September of 1977. It was a heated campaign. It was a very close campaign, and it boiled down to the two cities making presentations in Colorado Springs to the board of directors of the United States Olympic Committee, which in those days had about 100 members. New York lost by about 7 or 8 votes, as I recall. I don't remember the statistics. But the governor and New York came first in the presentation. The governor and the mayor were the leaders of the talk, gave a very emotional presentation. It concluded with the mayor of New York saying that during the opening ceremony, every church bell in the city of New York would ring. It was at the same time. It concluded on an emotional note. And then it was time for Los Angeles. And the governor of California got up and said, well, don't listen to what you've just heard, because those of us in elected life will not be in these same jobs in 1984. So don't buy it. That was a certain first-year governor by the name of Jerry Brown. So Los Angeles won the bid, and at that point became the only city interested. Peter Ueberroth used to talk about the fact, accurately, that Tehran had talked briefly about mounting a bid. And he used that as a laugh line in his speeches by saying, well, there was one other candidate, Tehran, but they were having management problems in Tehran. So when it did come down to making a final vote on whether the games would come to Los Angeles, city council approval was required. And that approval was won by 1 vote. 8-7 at the time. Now, in retrospect, it's like, how could they have done that? But there was concern over the finances and what had happened in Montreal. And Los Angeles did pass a ballot measure that prevented any tax dollars from being spent on the games, but there were still members of the city council who were not convinced that that was sufficient protection for the city. And in fact, the final debate was so heated. There was one member of the council, whom I won't name, but who almost got in a fist fight on the council floor. But happily, the city council voted that by 1 vote. And the first decision for the organizing committee to make was who's going to be the CEO. And Peter Ueberroth was chosen by 1 vote. So think about how Olympic history would have been different if those three decisions I just mentioned had gone the other way. Suppose New York had been the candidate for 1984. Would other cities around the world have still said, gee, it's the U.S. turn, now that LA was not the candidate? Perhaps not. Or if the games had been held in New York, would we still be talking about a 2028 games in Los Angeles? And would the 1984 games in New York have had the same financial success that LA enjoyed? And then moving on to the city council vote, they could have voted the other way and we wouldn't have had the games at all. Same thing if the games hadn't taken place here. And then the Peter Ueberroth decision. What if it had gone to someone else? Could someone else have done the same thing? Well, we'll never know, but I would say that Peter was uniquely positioned to be able to build a legacy, the legacy that he did. So I just wanted to make those comments to sort of set the stage for the rest of the panel discussion. And I can also tell you, just from personal experience, I had the good fortune to be a member of the team that worked on the bid for the 84 games in 77 and 78. And then that put me in a position to be one of the first people that Peter Ueberroth hired when he was hired in 1979. And the very first time I met him, which was actually my job interview with him, I asked him, because it was top of mind and in the news, was he concerned about the financial aspect of this, and what did he think about whether the event could break even and pay for itself? And he said that he'd had the chance to review the financial records. He himself had only been hired a few weeks before, but he said he had the chance to review the financial records of every Olympics held since the Second World War. And he said, you know something interesting? He said, if you take away construction costs, they all made money. So he said, I know we can do the same because we don't have to have any significant construction here. You know, we can minimize those costs. And I think that is still true. I think most of the Olympics since, if not all of them, could say that if you eliminate construction. So that was the key to 84, and 2028 using the same philosophy with no permanent construction. And I think that's indirectly a legacy of the 84 games. So I'll stop there, and Art, do you want me to? So I'll have more to say later on. Thank you.
Okay, now we have Oscar Delgado to talk about the long-term legacies of the Olympics and how that is significant as it relates to, let me find the presentations, how it relates to the planning of the upcoming games. Oh, here we go.
Good morning. Give me a little more energy. Good morning. There we go. I need the energy, as I was just on a plane last night, so forgive me if I seem a little tired. I was actually in Colorado Springs at the United States USOPC campus, so I came home to my kitchen that's being remodeled and my pregnant wife, as we're expecting our firstborn. So I'm here to speak on behalf of the LA4 Foundation staff, our presidency, Renato Simro, our board, and our Play Equity Fund team. I think that the stage was set very well as to the impact that 84 had. 32, I would say, was a physical transformation with a lot of firsts, such as the Athletes Village. 1984 was a financial transformation. It was the venue, everything was just set perfectly to execute the games. I was alive during the 84 Olympics, so let's just put that on the record. Peter Ueberroth was actually my age when he was appointed to the position of leading the games. And most of the staff, from what I've learned, was very, very young, and they ran a very, very disciplined campaign. I'm here to represent the legacy. And so let me just, as I was sitting over here, I looked up the definition of legacy, and I think it's important to be conscious of that. So the definition of legacy is the long-lasting impact of particular events, actions, etc., that took place in the past or of a person's life. Now, Peter, without question, was a phenomenal leader, but he had a phenomenal team. So as I was just at this conference in Colorado Springs, we were talking about youth sports and youth development. Clearly, youth sports looks very different now than it did in 1984. So how about this, just to not lose momentum, and I know we're a little bit on time crunch, and I have some of the notes here. I can spit some facts and knowledge on just the 84 games. So as was said before, the 3 M's, which were Munich, which many of you remember what happened in Munich in the assassinations, Montreal, which had debt. I was actually in Montreal at the Olympic Park 2 weeks ago, getting certified to be an international judge, which I'll talk about that for a few seconds later. But the movement was reinvigorated. So you had the 3 M's, which were Munich, Montreal, and Moscow, which we boycotted. So the track record was not good. We got the games, and there was this reinvigoration of the movement. There was expanded competition for women. 1984 was the first time that there was a women's marathon event. Joan Benoit Samuelson won the event, and it was the first time because apparently women could not run a full marathon. And so there was this movement of building progress. It was the first time it was introduced, the opportunities for the Paralympic Games. As we move forward, and we're all Angelinos, I would encourage you that when you talk about the 28 Olympics, you say that it's the 28 Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. That's really important because that's a population of our community that needs to be represented. 2012, London did an exceptional job when it came to the Paralympic Games. So, created new possibilities for corporate partners. I worked a decade at the Los Angeles Dodgers in 3 different departments. And I can tell you everything that exists now in pro sports came from the 84 Games. Disciplined corporate partnership sales, disciplined ticket sales. From what I've heard, Peter did not give away 1 free ticket to anybody. No one got a free ticket. Apparently there are some senators that still remember that. Advanced technology and innovation. The television coverage was huge. And then it also inspired our youth. So the L84 Foundation was not born to create Olympic champions. That's not our mission, but it certainly at the time gave aspirations and hopes, and people remember the various Olympians, Greg Louganis winning a gold medal, or track and field stars. So here's some facts on our foundation. When it was born, the tagline was helping youth become life ready through sports. Over 4 million have been served, 2,500 grantee partners across Southern California, about 100,000 youth are reached annually, and it's been the gift that keeps on giving. The 84 Olympic surplus was $232.5 million. That's how much money was left over. 60% went to the United States Olympic Committee, 40% went to start this thing, this idea, where Peter and his team, there was different opinions as to what to do. Should we spend it down? And the idea came that, hey, you have this money, put it in a pot, let it grow, and it'll be the gift that keeps on giving. And that's what's happened over the last 30 plus years. So actually, let me back up for a second. So, just quick story here. I'm a first-generation American. My parents are immigrants. When I was 8 years old, I participated in a community program that was funded by the L84 Foundation. 2 years later, I benefited from a second grant, which was a capital project not far from here in Pasadena. And it turned out I was pretty good at the sport. Made my first junior nationals at 11, then I got a full ride to college, I paid for grad school, and I trained for 2 Olympic Games. I came up short on the Olympic dream, but I competed in 2 World Cups. But I can tell you, as a child of the greater LA area, my life would have gone in a completely different trajectory if it was not for the games. I actually found out who the person was that applied for that grant for that first little rinky-dink community program. I'm actually friends with his son. But I've come full circle. And I will tell you that it's because there were people that had the courage to think about legacy and to think about beyond the circus that is the games, right? Because it's, and I say circus with all respect, but it is an event, and then the event's gonna leave. And so it's, what do you want to have as your fingerprint after this large event? So where we are now, because sports was very different, we've launched the Play Equity Fund. LA4 Foundation is a private foundation. The Play Equity Fund is our charity. The LA4 Foundation will continue to do the work that it's doing, but the Play Equity Fund has more room for creativity and partnerships, and also no geographic restrictions. The foundation and all the work that it's done has supported 51 different sports, which I would challenge all of you to write down 51 different sports on a piece of paper, from diving to track and field or archery or fencing or water polo. Across Southern California, there's been a big impact. And we have realized that we can't do it alone, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think this is a moment where kids, young adults, coaches need all the support that they can get. Moving your body, exercising and playing sport, it brings community together. And I think it brings people together so that we live in a more healthy harmony. Picture of Peter, and then also, if you've never actually seen footage of the opening ceremonies, it's something to see. I think it really, working at the foundation, we have a library with 2 full-time employees that are librarians, and so I've seen footage and photographs. I've actually seen the document where Peter got offered the job, which is just written on a typewriter. But I've seen footage of just what the games in '84 looked like. So it was a magical time in LA, and I'm optimistic 2028 will be the same way. But I think, as pointed before, those that put together 32 were Angelini knows that were somehow inspired, and then those in '84 the same, and I think we can say the same as far as 2028.
Is that it?
That's it.
Thank you. So we're going to have a little Q&A period with both David and Oscar, but there's a couple other people in the room that I want to mention who are also of significance for the '84 games. Jane Usher, of course, she is the wife, widow of Harry Usher, who was CEO. What was his title?
Executive VP and General Manager.
Executive VP and General Manager of the '84 Games. And
also board member, I should say.
And also LA '84 board member, of course. And Marcia, I'm having a brain cramp right now. John Fisher. John Fisher, right? Yeah. John Fisher, retired LA DOT, who was hugely influential in the planning and operations of transportation during the '84 games. And I want to pick your brain a little bit during the discussion, if that's okay with you. Sure. Because I think that's one of the huge lessons learned for the games. So can everybody hear me okay? Do I need a mic?
Use the mic.
Hello? Am I on? Oh, I'm on. Okay. All right. So here, you know what? You guys hold this, and I'll be over there. Okay. All right. Oh, we got another one? Oh, cool.
Art, if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce, there's a couple of other people with '84 ties that I'd like to introduce. One is the Vice President of Press Operations back in '84, who was responsible for the world media, Rich Perlman. Rich also authored the official report, which came out a year after the games, and did a great job. That's still in libraries that some of you may have had access to. And also, Craig Lawson was Mayor Tom Bradley's primary liaison to the Thanks.
Great. All right, so I'm going to start off with David. You mentioned, I'm sorry? Yeah, why don't you bring it up to the center? You mentioned that about Peter reviewing the official reports from the previous games and how he realized that they would have turned a profit had it not been for the capital outlay, new stadia and arena and such. Was the planning completely from the very start of the 84 games predicated on minimal construction?
Short answer is yes. Also, when you're talking about the previous games and how they organized their finances, it wasn't only about capital construction of facilities, but in some cases, if they had to upgrade their airport or expand their metro system or whatever, they would attribute those costs to the games. And of course, Los Angeles did upgrade its airport for 84, but that was something that the city did on its own. It wasn't done only for the games. It benefited the games for sure, and the games provided them with a deadline. And it's probably not a coincidence that the current upgrade of LAX will finish in time for the 2028 games.
So what were the negotiations like with, say, the Coliseum and the Forum? Those were all privately, quasi-public venues that I assume it wasn't just, hey, you can use us, but...
Sure, those were lease agreements.
Were they?
Yeah, yes. Across the board, those were lease agreements. And one of the other things that was a first, I think, and started with 84 and with Peter, was the notion of corporate sponsorship, title sponsorship of venues. We have the McDonald's Swim Stadium, we have the 7-Eleven Velodrome. Unfortunately, neither one exists anymore. But that's because 7-Eleven Velodrome is now where, what do they call it? The Dignity Health is. Yeah, that's like Crypto.com. You got to think twice before you say who it is.
Yeah. So was there? What about? And then also the venues. We talked about the 32 games being the first Olympic Games with a purpose-built athletes venue. That continued for every subsequent Olympic Games until 1984. And why was it different in 1984?
In 84, the commitment as part of the original bid was that there would be no construction of an Olympic Village, and that the IOC would understand and have to accept that there would be two villages, UCLA and USC. And that worked out. That was, countries stayed intact in one village or the other. They didn't put half of the Argentine team here and the other half there, and they mixed up the teams and housed them in such a way that everyone was secure. For 2028, it will be different because UCLA has grown in the meantime and has greater capacity, so all the athletes will be housed at UCLA, and USC will be a media village. The reason for that is that UCLA's housing is all on an on-campus hill. You can basically put a big fence around it very easily, whereas the media village, the housing at USC, you try and put a fence around it, it winds up looking more like a salamander.
Yeah.
And it really wouldn't make sense to put all of the athletes at USC, so that would be the media village, is my understanding.
Okay. I'm going to transition to Oscar right now. And here. Okay. So question there is, explain a little bit more about LA84, how it operates. Is there a grant cycle that works? Who are the recipients of the grants? And also, is there any capital outlay, which I'm sure there is, but maybe you could talk about that a little bit more.
So the large majority of the impact has been in the greater LA County area. And the majority of our support is to programs. So it's a programmatic support, whether it's we're in the greater San Gabriel Valley area. So if it's a Boys and Girls Club or First Tee Golf of Pasadena, the majority is programmatic support. There have been some capital projects. As stated, the venues from the Olympic Games owned and operated by other third parties, whether it's the Roosevelt Stadium or USC or UCLA. But there are some venues, if you drive along the 210 freeway to catch the 5, you'll see some soccer fields, Ferraro Fields. Those were funded by the LA84 Foundation. The Roosevelt Aquatics in Pasadena, funded by the LA84 Foundation, which actually I will point out that we did have a name change. The foundation was born as the Amateur Athletic Foundation, the AAF, and then there was just a branding name change. People were getting AAF confused with AAU. But the programs, they're all over the Southland, in various neighborhoods, whether it's South LA, San Gabriel Valley, San Fernando Valley. But some of those venues from '84 and or 32 are still in use. A capital project we had was the refurbishing of the 1932 aquatics pool, which is next to the Coliseum. If you've never been there, I would encourage you to go. There's big Olympic rings outside, and the facade outside, it looks like the 32 venue, but it was upgraded to being a modern pool or pools, and also there's basketball gyms upstairs. But they did keep, I think it's like the first 10 rows of the original 32 venue. But the majority of our work is programmatic on the LA4 side, but every now and again there's a capital project. I think the latest one was in Little Tokyo with the Budokan, which is a community center.
Now, does the organization quantify the impact that it makes through these grants?
Yes, let me tell you that we live in an era of data collection, right? We're all data nerds, and we want to be able to quantify and see things on an Excel spreadsheet. The '84 games was all done on a clipboard, from what I understand.
It was the back of an envelope.
Or the back of an envelope, right? But the quantifying the impact, I will tell you, it is challenging because we work at a higher level where we are supporting school districts as opposed to individual schools. So when it comes to an example, supporting the Boys and Girls Club, we're trying to do it at a higher altitude so it trickles down, because there's a capacity issue. If we were to say, hey, individual schools, you can apply for grants, we'd have a tough time. And there are some sports like soccer, as an example. I truly believe that just the soccer space itself, our whole foundation could exist and just support that one sport. In addition to the grant funding, we do conduct research. Just top of mind, literally off the top of my head, we conducted a report that we do every 2 years, a survey in LA County, which I know his name was mentioned earlier, Dr. Wayne Wilson. He was part of that project when it was first launched. But in LA County, kids play twice the amount of soccer as the rest of the country, but have 1/4 of the amount of fields. So we have the weather here to play year round, but we don't have the space. So we're looking at things like that, and there's creative alternatives where futsal courts, LAFC, the Galaxy, and others they're trying to do that, where you can take a tennis court, which I'm not trying to kill the game of tennis, but you can turn a court into a soccer space, which is actually more beneficial for kids because they can touch the ball more as opposed to playing on a large field. So those are examples of the things that we're looking at when looking at sport. We support in-school and after-school programming, which is very different. At the moment, PE is being cut across schools, which just the value of physical education. That's something that we're working on with the Play Equity Fund, is to elevate the value of play in sports. I mean, it's LAUSD, and I'm going off on a tangent here, so forgive me, but LAUSD data, I think the last time I saw it was graduation rates was somewhere between 70 and 80%. So basically 7/8 high school kids are graduating in LAUSD, but when it comes to student athletes in high school, 90% are graduating. So there's a correlation between graduation rates and kids playing sport, and that's because they have a coach, they have a minimum GPA they need to keep up. So there's two sides of the coin to youth sports. the LA4 Foundation identified itself as a youth sports organization, and that's not what we are. We're a youth development organization. We're trying to get these kids ready for life so that they can become doctors and engineers and parents and community leaders. Because it's a pyramid. It's like 1% is going to make the Olympic Games. I made it to the top, 3%. So we're doing the good work, but we are not trying to create Olympic champions. We're not thinking about these athletes, which need help. We're thinking about the masses.
This one's for David. Let's fast forward now to your involvement with the LA Sports Council. You're a senior advisor to that organization. Can you tell us a little bit about how significant sports are, let's say at the professional level, obviously, but not just at the professional level, but how significant of a role have sports played in Southern California's development?
Well, I think aside from the Olympic aspect, which we've been talking about all morning, and which I think is self-evident how important that is to Los Angeles, I think I believe sports plays a more important role for Los Angeles than almost any other city in the country, if not the world. And the reason I say that is not because our teams are better here or anything like that, but I think that we lack a coherent civic boundary, if you will. The people who live in the LA area don't share the same urban experience as people who live in Chicago or Baltimore or Miami. Depending where you live and where you work, you might live in one city and you work in another, and your spouse works in another, and your kids go to school in a different city. And when you go to that work environment, assuming you're not working remotely, you're with people who could be sharing a different climate than you do. Maybe they live in the mountains and you're at the beach, as one example. So that's unique to LA. And what cuts through the clutter of the geography and all of the other issues of ethnicity and everything else is sports. Not every day, not all the time, but right now the Lakers are in the playoffs. I think people are into that and they're following it. When the Dodgers are in the World Series, that's when boundaries come down and people feel they're in the same environment. And so I think that's something that is unique to Los Angeles, but that makes sports an ingredient that other cultural aspects of life here can't quite match.
Thank you. Now, before we wrap up, I want to give a letter to our friend John Fisher here to talk about transportation during the '84 games. And given that, given that the '84 games took place at a time before we had rail, we were transit as it was only bus, and there were multi-jurisdictions involved. Can you talk about a little bit about the transportation planning and how the backlog, the congestion that everybody predicted never took place, and actually the transportation system actually ran more efficiently during the games?
Thank you. I didn't know you were going to call on me, so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but I just think it's such an important role.
That's okay. I think early on it was recognized that there were multiple partners in the transportation system. There was Caltrans, who managed the freeways, but there was a highway patrol which enforced on the freeways. There was the LAPD, which had previously had the jurisdiction of closing off streets and managing traffic at the intersections. There was the Sheriff's Office, and there was the Department of Transportation, which had been around only 5 years as a transportation department. So it was recognized early on that there needed to be cooperation among the partners, that some of the things that each agency did would have to be coordinated with the others. So they set up a command center in one of the floors of the Caltrans old building that is no longer there. And throughout the 2 weeks of the Olympics, That would be managed by all the people who had a role in enforcing and managing the transportation system. And any decisions that were made had to be made jointly, whether it was an emergency thing or it was just information. And that helped greatly to make sure we're all operating on the same page, so to speak. There was also an emphasis on, since there was not new construction, there was an emphasis on better managing what we had. So Caltrans had the freeway system. They were going to use their cameras to give back live information. LADOT had, through the knowledge that the Olympics were coming, was able to secure a grant to build its automated signal system, which was called ADSAC, and that was implemented just 1 month in July before the Olympic Games began, and we were able then to manage all the signals from one point in a control center. So we gained a lot of experience with that, and because traffic was managed well during the Olympics, ADSAC was able to secure additional grant funding to be implemented ultimately throughout the entire city. But I think, honestly, one of the things that worked so well was the scaring people to drive during that time. Now, I can remember in 1982, just 2 years before the Olympics, there was a rainstorm in downtown LA, and the car was stalled, and the lane was closed, and traffic couldn't get through, and traffic backed up. And that extended to all the signals in the downtown area. So there's a real concern about gridlock. That became a new term, and everyone was worried about gridlock during the Olympic Games. And with the cooperative efforts, through the better managing the systems that you have, they would go a long way. But everyone was saying, we are concerned about gridlock. Please stay home, go on vacation, or whatever. And I think we encouraged enough people to do that, to where people honestly did stay home or took their vacations, and that made a big difference. And that too allowed the Olympic Games to proceed without any significant congestion.
So I think it's fair to say that stuff like ADSAC, transportation band management, system management, those are also legacies of the 84 Games.
They are, and we, after that, we were able to take it further, and we had a better cooperative working relationship with Caltrans and managing the freeway system and the street system in a cooperative fashion. In fact, when Caltrans had a few projects, one to widen the Harbor Freeway, and then another one to add a lane on the Ventura Freeway, they contributed to ADSAC to allow us to manage the streets while they were closing off lanes to improve their freeway system. So it led to additional cooperation. Also, through the effort of managing traffic in an active fashion during the Olympics, LA was able to have a traffic action team that not only worked for something like the Olympics, but for every special event like the Lakers game. And we were able to have a dedicated team where we operated in cooperative fashion with the ADSAC Center, the traffic action team, and the police. So it led to better managing the special events as well.
Well, thank you, John. John, David, Oscar, thank you so much.
Thanks, sir. Before we break for lunch, just some quick announcements. We're running a bit behind on the program. We have lunch scheduled for about 15 minutes. And we had ordered 55 box lunches, so you can look around the room and see what happened. Is the program became very successful within the last couple of days.
Yeah.
And some of you signed up within the last couple of days. And we had put on our flyer that we couldn't accommodate people for lunch if they were walk-ins today. So I'm going to ask basically that the walk-ins wait, let everybody who basically signed up weeks ago or within the last week, let them grab their lunch outside. There's also lunch options here at the Huntington. There's a very good grab and go just as you came in. There's a little cafe there that serves coffee and sandwiches if you are hungry. We're scheduled to have our facilitated discussion at 12:30. So just a quick announcement, the lunches are outside. You're welcome to eat at the tables. You can take some chairs outside if you want to eat in the Amundsen patio. I'm going to have the board members come up here because I need to talk with the board. People are grabbing their lunches. So anyway, restrooms are outside, and we'll see you back. What time is it now? 12. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, at 12:30 we'll start our facilitated discussion. So thanks.